All right. Happy Monday to all my pastor friends out there. You just finished preaching yesterday. You threw your notes in the bin, and now it's time to start all over again. I just finished up my admin tasks that I do on Monday morning. I was about to turn the page to begin sermon prep for this coming week. Figured I would do a little video on how I'm currently doing sermon prep, what that looks like for me, and so I'll just walk you through it here. Over the past 20 years, about 20 years ago, I was in Bible college, took a hermeneutics class, and that class kind of prompted me to create my own sermon preparation workflow and, just a series of steps that I want to work through systematically in order to arrive at a finished product. And I've gone through probably 10 or 15 iterations of that throughout the years. And this is what I'm currently using. This is a Word document that's based on a series of 3 journal articles Tim Keller wrote for the Journal for Biblical Counseling years and years ago. If you want those, it's CCEF volume 12 through 13. So it begins in 12:3, continues in 13:1, and then concludes in 13:2. Really great articles, really just, Keller, if you're familiar with his work, his preaching book is really, really good, but it's more theoretical, which I think it needs to be for that book, but it's not very practical. It's not nuts and bolts, I should say. It's incredibly practical, but it's not nuts and bolts. And these 3 journal articles are far more of the nuts and bolts. And so what I've done is I've outlined the article and I've tweaked it over time to suit my own needs and whims. So anyway, let me walk you through it and kind of show you Logos and what I do. At a high level, you want to begin by reading the text for flow. You want to just familiarize yourself with the basic contours of the text, and that comes by reading it many times. Then you want to move from kind of the flow of the whole or the contours of the whole down into the individual parts. So you study the parts. If you've taken hermeneutics class, this is all very familiar, or even just a basic Bible study, inductive Bible study class. This is all, none of this is earth-shattering. Here's where the sermon really begins to take shape, is you want to crystallize the main idea of the text. What is the text giving you? What is the basic point of the passage? And from there, this is the bridge where you're going to move from here's the basic idea of the text to here's the central proposition of the sermon that I'm going to preach. I think Brian Chappell once said something like, how many points should a sermon have? At least one. Well, yeah, you got to have a proposition, because a sermon needs to make an argument, and it needs to move people from a mere intellectual proposition about the text, a mere intellectual explanation of what the text is, to an actual argument. And so you got to turn the main idea of the text into a proposition. You ask it some questions. We'll talk about that in a moment. You arrange the answers to the questions you ask in an outline, and then you can begin really attaching supporting material. Now, before I go back up to the beginning and before I look at Logos, let me just say the attaching supporting material, anytime ideas come to me from the beginning to the very end of the process, it kind of just gets thrown down here at the very end. Illustrations, quotes, wherever my mind wanders, and I come back to it. I don't want a good illustration to lead the direction of the sermon. I only want it to help emphasize or fill out the point that the sermon is trying to make. So anyway, all right, let's get back to the beginning. And I set up my Logos like this. I have a third of my screen is my my sermon outline, or my sermon prep document, and I'm writing in it. And then 2/3 of the screen is my Logos layout. I've got the ESV. I keep the King James right here. I keep a couple study Bibles. So this first panel is my Bibles, my study Bibles. I have text comparison down here, so I can compare, NLT, Message, CSB, all of those. Keep my commentaries in the middle that I can just flick through and click off. And then I use Mounces a lot. I also use BDAG, but I like Mounces a lot, especially for copying and pasting. It's a lot easier if I want to actually use something in the resource than BDAG. Some various Bible dictionaries, intros to New Testament. So as you can see, I'm set up for Luke. This is actually the sermon I just finished preaching yesterday. I wanted to go back and use it as an example. So what I would do is I would begin reading for flow, and I'm going to read the passage 5 to 10 times, both in the English Standard, which I preach out of, and in various translations down here. And as I read, I'm just underlining anything that makes an impression, writing out anything I have a question about, anything that puzzles me. And by the time I've read through it 10 times, I'm writing a summary of what it says. I want to work very rapidly to get that initial impression of, hey, this is what the main idea of the text is. What's the basic purpose the author has in writing this? And I write that out, a paraphrase of the passage in my own words. Then I move pretty quickly to dividing up the passage. Here's where I want to get to the 3 parts. So my text this past Sunday was Luke 9:18 through 23, and I think the translators and editors of the ESV have done a great job of basically breaking this out into the main parts of what ended up being my sermon. 18 through 20, part 1, 21 and 22 is part 2, and then 23 to 27 is the conclusion. And what you're looking for here are words that might indicate a break or a change. Now it happened. Here in 21, a command comes in, and then here is yet another command. And so I'm trying to break the big passage down into its constituent parts. What is, if the whole passage says this, what are the parts that make that argument? And you typically find that by locating contrasts, comparisons in the text, repetition of words, cause and effect relationships, contrasting conjunctions, coordinating conjunctions, things like that. You're looking at the grammar, honestly, of the text. And I'm asking the question, okay, how does this section contribute to the overall point of the text? Then I'm moving on to cross-references. We're kind of getting into some interpretation here. Once you start moving to cross-references, you're asking, what does the text mean? Because you're trying to discern how it interacts with the rest of the scripture and what cross-references are pertinent. I'll read 6 to 12 commentaries for balance. I will tell you that right now, what I'm doing is I read the text, I do my own kind of study, and then I'm going to Calvin, and I might go to Matthew Henry. I just like J.C. Ryle for pure applicational stuff, but he doesn't really help me discern the text as much. I'll read Calvin, I'll read Matthew Henry really quickly. I am just in a phase personally right now of not going to post-critical commentaries unless I need to, unless I have a very specific question. But I've got all the main commentaries that you might want, post-critical commentaries on Luke's gospel. I have referenced them. I do reference them when I need them. But again, I am really interested in the high-level meaning of the text and not the endless answering of higher critical questions in the text. And I'm not particularly interested in loads. I don't put loads of stock in deep word studies. They can be helpful, but anyway, the modern commentaries are really good, but they tend to be a little too granular for my taste. After I've read some commentaries, I want to discern the systematic theology of the text. What are the major doctrines that the text engages, develops, and proclaims? This one is on the Son of Man and the Christ. Those are the main doctrines. And maybe I talk about glory. We'll talk about that in a moment. I want to discern the biblical theology of the passage. In this text, with the Christ being the anointed one, there's got to be a biblical theology of Messiah. There's got to be some biblical theology of deliverers that God sent. Because all of that plays into what the disciples are confessing, or what Peter's confessing when he calls Jesus the Christ. And Jesus is really going to challenge them on that when he says that the Christ must die. So I'm doing biblical theology. Once I've done that, I come back and I crystallize the main idea of the passage. And so here's how I explained what Luke is trying to communicate in Luke 9:18 through 27. Jesus explains that he has come first to suffer, then to be glorified, and his followers will experience the same. I think that's a pretty fair summary of what these verses are trying to communicate. That doesn't cover everything, but I like really nice, tight, succinct main ideas. Okay, so this is what I really wanted to talk about today. Turn that main idea into an active, declarative, second person, practical proposition, which is people oriented. I think this is really essential for me right now. I won't say for everybody, but it's really essential for me to write a good sermon. I need to make this need related. And so here's what I wrote. Embrace suffering with Jesus so that you might enjoy the glory of Jesus at his appearing. That's one main idea of the sermon. It could have sounded a little differently. It could have changed a little bit. It doesn't cover every single thing in the text. And that's one of the hardest things that I had to learn is you can't say it all. And so you've got to make choices. You got to make selective choices. So that was my main idea of the text. Okay, here's where it gets, I think, really, really helpful and interesting. This is where the sermon really takes shape. You want to start asking the proposition question. So the proposition is, you, listener, embrace suffering with Jesus so that you might enjoy the glory of Jesus at his appearing. So I'm asking it essentially two questions. Why and how? Why and how? So why should I embrace suffering? Well, and the key here, let me say this, is write down all the passage and only the passage tells you in answering this. You want to avoid tangents and rabbit trails. There might be a million reasons to embrace suffering. I want to know, why is this passage telling me to embrace suffering? How is this passage telling me to embrace suffering? So I want to answer these two questions from the text. So why should I embrace suffering? Well, Jesus did it for me. If I hold on to the world, I'll lose everything. And there's coming glory. I had more than that. This is not the actual document that I used. This is just an example. If you want this document right now, 653 words. The finished document that I did for this text last week was over 5,000 words. So a lot of writing. And if I tried to show it to you, I'd look like a crazy person because it's all over the place. Why should I embrace suffering? How should I embrace suffering? How? I have to embrace it daily, take up the cross daily. It's total. It's a total claim on my life. And this is where I got into what taking up your cross means. It's total surrender, total control is given to God. Don't expect glory now. Don't be disappointed if you're not praised now for following Jesus. And don't shortcut trials, because Jesus says trials are the way to receive glory. Okay. I'm flying really fast, obviously, but the next step is, okay, arrange answers into an outline. You take the answers to those questions and say, okay, how can I outline that? I fully believe most pastors don't spend enough time thinking about their outline. Your outline is what frames the entire discussion. It helps everyone focus on the main point. A picture without a frame is terrible. You don't know what to look at. You don't know what to focus on. There has to be a focal point, and the outline does that. And what I've been doing over the years is collecting different ways to outline. You can do a simple textual outline where you're going exegetically, verse by verse, kind of blow by blow. Narratively kind of unfolds like a story. You can facet around a central idea, and so you're looking at it from this angle, then you're looking at it from this angle, then you're looking at it from that angle. You can contrast. You can expose. Begin with a question, and then expose the answers as you go. I went with kind of what I call a ladder outline, where you start at the bottom and you build up. And so here was my outline for this past Sunday. If we will follow Jesus, we must, number one, hear his deadly call, And that's where I began at the very end here and dealt with just this striking call that no one wants to believe. We want to soften it. We want to get ourselves off the hook. But Jesus says, here's what it is. You got to embrace the cross. And then I ladder up to the why, the glory. So the hear his deadly call, learn his true identity. This is where I circled back to these verses up here and talked about, yes, he is the Christ, but what does that mean? He's the Christ who's come to die. He's the Christ who's come to bear the cross first. So you won't be able to bear the cross for him unless you see him bearing the cross for you. So that's kind of one step up. He tells you, he gives you this impossible thing that you must do that you can't do. He's done it for you. And then the top rung of the ladder is the glory. Down here in verse 26, the Son of Man's coming in glory. The Christ will be glorious. And to the degree that you see that glory, to the degree that you know that glory now and experience it now and have a foretaste of what that glory is, it makes your crosses bearable. And then, once I had the outline, this is where I started putting on illustrations, attaching supporting materials. So for instance, under Hear His Deadly Call, no one in my church is facing an actual crucifixion this week, but I did talk about Aaron Wren's article on the three worlds: the positive world, the neutral world, and the negative world. We live in a negative world. It's socially costly. Being a Christian could cost you in your career. It could cost you with your family. So I use that as an illustration there. Learn his true identity. This is where I did more biblical theology and talked about all the old deliverers who could not deliver from the internal enemy of sin. They could deliver from the external enemies, but they couldn't deliver from sin. And so Jesus, this is why he has to come and die. This is why he has to be crucified. This is how he takes our place. He's the one who denies himself, takes up his cross. And then finally, in the future glory, I used a Richard Wurmbrand illustration where Wurmbrand basically said, those who suffer with Christ hear music to which other men are deaf. And to the degree that, and I went to 2 Corinthians 3, where Paul talks about when we turn to Jesus Christ, the veil is removed, and we with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are transformed from one degree of glory into the next. We're transfigured. And so to the degree that you're seeing that glory and staring into that glory that is coming, you can face the cross. You can face the trials that he does bring. And let me just tell you, that center section there of really nailing what is the central proposition that I want to communicate in this sermon. What's the outline that is going to help me frame that proposition the best and wrestle with it and get people to see it? And then after that, being really excruciatingly ruthless in what I cut from the sermon that does not contribute to that main point, to those main rungs of that ladder. You just have to cut. There were so many things I wanted to say in the sermon, and you just have to know that you're trying to make an impact, you're trying to make an impression in the moment. The goal of the sermon is to cause the listener to worship on the spot, not to just give them a bunch of curiosities. You're trying to bring the word of God to bear on their heart. You're trying to make Jesus real to their heart. Not just knowledge downloaded into their brain, but Jesus has to be real to their heart. And the outline does that, and the illustrations do that, and ultimately showing how Jesus Christ and the gospel satisfies the main need of the passage. So more could be said. I'm going to shut it down there because I actually do need to start prepping for this coming week, but just felt like this was a particularly good sermon to show kind of how I'm putting it all together. If you have questions about it, ask away down in the comments, wherever on the blog. Would love to help you, would love to dialogue with you. So God bless, and we'll see you soon.